Hey guys, welcome to Nerdarchy, for nerds by nerds. I'm Ted, and today I'm hanging out with
Nerdarchy Dave.
Today we ask the question, has D&D made your castle useless?
Drop down in the description below where you can find Nerdarchy, the newsletter, game weekly tips, as well as learn how to game with Nerdarchy.
So, castles.
Fantasy castles. Is a fantasy castle useless in your Dungeons and Dragons game? And we're here to discuss that, talk about it, maybe even answer some of your questions on that.
So there's a number of things to kind of consider when you're looking at, is a castle a legitimate thing in a fantasy setting? And first and foremost is you've got magic, and second, you've got things with abnormal abilities.
Yeah, so in previous editions, there was a lot of like spells, monster abilities, where they had like countermeasures almost built into them. Like it would be a thing in a previous edition if you didn't want ethereal creatures, or I think even like teleportation as well, where they would grind up certain things and put them into the mortar of the stone, and then they would build the castle with that. I think like lead might have been one of the things too that they would line the walls with
to prevent like X-ray vision.
Yes, but also like ghosts from being able to walk through walls. Teleportation was the other thing. Any kind of actual extra dimensional travel.
Right. So the different methods, you've got incorporeal movement, and there's loads of spectral creatures and spells that kind of give you that setup. And you can usually go through a foot of stone, less, like 3 inches of metal, but, a decent amount of dirt. But then you've got teleportation, which some of them are linked by sight. Others, it's like, well, I'm going to go 20 feet that way and hope.
Right, or as long as you're familiar with the area.
Right. You also have Earth Glide, which a number of elemental type creatures get that. So as long as it's not worked earth or stone, they can go through it no problem.
Right, and one of the things we discovered was Earthglide is actually the easiest of these forms of travel to defeat, because what you could actually do if you created a kind of like flagstone foundation to build your castle on, you'd have to excavate a huge hole, work your walls deeper into the ground, and then basically fill everything back in, and then build. The earth elemental would not be able to come up and under your wall into the castle, although it might eventually be able to pummel its way through the floor.
Right. Now, that does spark an interest. There's very little mention of it, but the DMG talks about a damage threshold without actually giving you any information. Big objects such as castle walls often have extra resilience represented by a damage threshold. An object with a damage threshold has immunity to all damage unless it takes an amount of damage from a single attack or effect equal to or greater than its damage threshold, in which case it takes damage as normal. Any damage that fails to meet or exceed the object's damage threshold is considered superficial and doesn't reduce the object's hit points.
We actually had to do a little bit of research in order to find out where we could find any mention of damage threshold. It's very similar to the observant feat, where that's the only place the passive investigate check is mentioned at all.
So if you actually go to page 119 of your DMG, it actually has airborne and waterborne vehicles, and it's got a damage threshold for some of them. So a warship has a damage threshold of 20. So we were talking off camera that, okay, well, if a warship, which is reinforced wood, has a damage threshold of 20, you'd want to go to like 40 or 50 for like a hard castle wall. That would be my guess. At minimum, I would say 30. So that's a pretty substantial amount. Even when you get to, 5th level and I'm casting Fireball, the walls are going to last for a while against that.
Yeah, also too, like we had recently watched Shadversity and his video on castles in a medieval fantasy setting, and he brought up some really good points about, in order to actually penetrate concrete or stone, they drill into the surface and then plant charges inside, so they need to get penetration in order to actually blow away the stone. So a fireball landing up against the outside of the wall isn't going to be nearly as effective, without getting it in there somehow.
Right. Now, by raw, a fireball is all fire damage. There's no concussive, there's no force. But if you actually look at the mechanics, every time anyone has ever thrown a fireball, they summon a ball of fire in their hand, they throw it, and it explodes. That implies concussion, in my opinion.
True, but you still have to get the penetration for it to really be effective.
Correct.
It's exploding against the outside of a wall.
Correct. We also, as we mentioned magic and the number of different things, but we also have to deal with flying. And there's loads of flying creatures or many ways to gain flight in D&D.
So we did find certain monsters are better than others when it comes to bringing down your castle.
So, ironically, Chad University mentioned dragons, and while dragons are large and formidable and terrifying and whatever have you, they fail to have that one key descriptor or type called siege monster, which becomes really useful when trying to take down objects or particularly castle walls. Now, the first thing that I jumped to was the Earth Elemental. Number one, I'd used it recently in a game, and I remembered that they had the siege monster quality. But even if we said, all right, let's go on the lower end of the scale of 30 for their damage threshold, the average damage on their slam is 14. So if you double it, that's still only 28. That doesn't get through the damage threshold.
Now, I feel like, that'd probably be sufficient to take down maybe a stone wall outside of like a manor or a mansion or something like that. They could beat their way through that. But, that thing is, maybe at best a foot thick.
Right.
Compared to a castle wall, which is going to be many feet thick. So,
right.
That's going to be a whole other story.
But we do know that there is a monster in D&D that is of legendary proportions, designed to pretty much break down anything in its way, and that's the one that you came up with.
The Tarrasque. The Tarrasque utterly eats through castle walls for breakfast. No problem.
The average damage, I believe, on their bite is 36 damage. And they are a siege monster. So, even if you went with the high end of damage threshold being 50, that's 72 damage on average. They got no problems breaking walls.
Right, and the other thing, too, is once you break through the threshold, I believe it's not like damage resistance. It doesn't take away from it. You're able to actually now damage it.
Yes. So let's just say the object has a damage threshold of 10. You do 10 points of damage to it. You've met its threshold, therefore you take 10 hit points off the object. If you do 11, you do 11. If you do 9, you do nothing. It's pretty interesting mechanic, and it's not like... I'm unfamiliar with the concept, or not concept, but the term threshold in in D&D. I haven't seen it in other editions. It's always been DR, where you take off, or resistance, where you get half, or immunity, where you take nothing. I've never seen the meet this, or you just don't.
Yeah, so that's new, and for 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, if you're dealing with castles, you absolutely have to look at that. So so the other thing too is, well, what about Dragonfire? In some instances, it's hot enough to melt stone walls, but we're talking about Dungeons and Dragons. We can literally open our monster manual and see how much an ancient red dragon can do with its breath weapon. And the question is, does it overcome, that 40 or 50 threshold of damage?
So the ancient red dragon does 26 die 6 fire damage, average of 91.
So yes, in Dungeons and Dragons, you literally do have to worry about a dragon if you have a castle. Although its physical attacks may not quite be enough to bring down the wall, based off the damage threshold and how much it does, and the fact that they're not a siege monster.
The red dragon's bite is a 21 damage on average. Not typically going to get there, even if you went siege, unless you wanted that middle of the road, 40. They're just not going to cut it. Now, 5th edition does tell you want to tweak a monster, go ahead and tweak a monster. I see no problem saying, you know what, once you get to Ancient for dragon status, you're gargantuan. Yeah, I got no problem slapping on the Siege monster trait.
Well, here's the thing. It doesn't really need it, though, because it can literally just melt the walls.
Well, that is true. Especially the red dragon. He doesn't even need to come in to engage. It can just fly up above and pour down dragon fire and just go back flying until it recharges. It's not like earlier editions where it's like, all right, they could either do it unlimited or they can only do it so many times a day. Here it's a recharge. I'm going to stay flying until I roll that 5 or 6, and okay, it's back. Let's go down and do it again.
So it appears we have answered the question. Is there a point to a castle in medieval fantasy in Dungeons and Dragons against a dragon? And clearly the answer is no, there's not.
How often is a dragon going to attack a castle? What is the hope that the dragon is going to get out of it? Dragons are intelligent monsters, and they are long-lived creatures. Unless there's something that they particularly want out of that castle, or someone from that castle has utterly wronged that dragon, what's the reward? What are they getting out of it?
Well, it all depends on the particular dragon, like you said. But say the dragon slept for 50 years, 100 years, wakes up, there's a castle in his backyard. He might be annoyed. Well, 1, he might be annoyed that it's there. 2, it's a dragon. Chances of him demanding tribute, very, very high. And chances of arrogant humans denying the dragon his tribute, also very high. Yeah, also very, very high. So there's definitely circumstances where that could come up. Then we'll go back to, and I kind of feel like this dovetails to our battle mage discussions we've had, and that is, castles versus magic.
Well, number one, as I said, that there's no reason why mages wouldn't be layering spells into those castle walls. In fantasy settings, you typically are going to be dealing with materials that are unknown to us, either stone or metal that are very receptive to defensive magics, or materials that repel magic. So you could easily have a castle wall that is just immune to magic, and you have to incorporate that material into your world, not just be like, nope, this one particular castle is immune to magic, end of story. But whenever you have someone who is going to be attacking a castle with magic, you probably have a defender there as well who can do counter spells or be launching their own fireballs at the encroaching army.
Now, I don't know if there are other spells in the player's handbook, but I did find 2 spells you can make permanent without the permanency spell. But it does take a year to do it. Teleportation Circle, granted, it's not very great for defending, but maybe if you need to move troops or move people around, it could be useful. And since you have a castle, it's not going anywhere. If you have that level of magic, it would make sense to incorporate a teleportation circle in your castle somewhere just for deployment. Now, the other thing that I found that is also interesting and could be very useful, Guards and Wards, same thing. Cast it every day for a year, it becomes permanent. So I don't know if there's any other instances. I didn't read through every spell to look for it.
It's like only, a few dozen pages worth of spells. I mean, come on.
Well, that's true. And you can probably just totally discount some right off the bat. So in previous editions of Dungeons and Dragons, we had ways to make spells permanent, and that would be another thing. But now you're gonna have to, you're gonna have to come up with rituals or exotic materials, like you said. A lot of this by raw, there's nothing there to make our castles more defensible against magic, or you literally just have to employ mages that just hang around all the time ready to counterspell and dispel magic as need be. Maybe a powerful use of the wish spell could make some things permanent. Clearly you would probably want to if you're going to go to that extent, like non-detection on certain places, so that enemy wizards couldn't scry your castle and then just teleport through the walls. I mean, there's things like flying, which is very problematic for a castle as well, because you can just go over the walls. But that being said, people flying, not as much of a problem, because a wall full of archers can pretty much fix that.
Or dispel magic.
Or Dispel Magic could fix that as well. The bigger problem would be like dragons and larger creatures that are actually able to drop large rocks. Even like in The Hobbit, the Battle of the Five Armies, you saw the use of the eagles, and one of the things they were doing was dropping rocks or even just dropping enemies. So how are you guys using castles in your medieval fantasy game, in your Dungeons and Dragons game? Let us know in the comments below. While you're at it, like, share, and subscribe.
Don't forget to check out all the awesome stuff over on Nerdarchy.com.
So until next time,
stay nerdy. Kind of consider when you're looking at, is a castle a legitimate thing in a fantasy setting? And first and foremost is you've got magic, and second, you've got things with abnormal abilities.
Yeah, so in previous editions, there was a lot of like spells, monster abilities, where they had like countermeasures almost built into them. Like it would be a thing in a previous edition if you didn't want ethereal creatures, or I think even like teleportation as well, where they would...
And you can usually go through a foot of stone, less, like 3 inches of metal, but, a decent amount of dirt. But then you've got teleportation, which some of them are linked by sight. Others, it's like, well, I'm going to go 20 feet that way and hope.
Right, or as long as you're familiar with the area.
Right. You also have Earth Glide, which a number of elemental type creatures get that. So as long as it's not worked earth or stone, they can go through it no problem.
Right, and one of the things we discovered was Arcknight is actually the easiest of these forms of travel to defeat, because what you could actually do, if you created a kind of like flagstone foundation to build your castle on, you'd have to excavate a huge hole, work your walls deeper into the ground, and then basically fill everything back in, and then build. The earth elemental would not be able to come up and under your wall, and where they would grind up certain things and put them into the mortar of the stone, and then they would build the castle with that. I think like lead might have been one of the things too that they would line the walls with
to prevent like X-ray vision.
Yes, but also like ghosts from being able to walk through walls. Teleportation was the other thing. Any kind of actual extra dimensional travel.
Right. So the different methods, you've got incorporeal movement, and there's loads of spectral creatures and spells that kind of give you that setup. Hey guys, welcome to Nerdarchy, for nerds by nerds. I'm Ted, and today I'm hanging out with
Nerdarchy.
Today we asked the question, has D&D made your castle useless?
Drop down in the description below where you can find Nerdarchy, the newsletter, game weekly tips, as well as learn how to game with Nerdarchy.
So, castles.
Fantasy castles. Is a fantasy castle useless in your Dungeons and Dragons game? And we're here to discuss that, talk about it, maybe even answer some of your questions on it.
So there's a number of things to